what is justice? What do we mean by this concept, this word that we use so often? What are its defining characteristics and ideas? Well, I think one of the best ways to discuss what this concept means is to look at how it is discussed by some of the justice warriors that we respect and look up to. And I can think of none better than to look at the life and writings of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s pursuit of justice and social justice has radically changed our society, and its impact has been global, international in scope. And his writings on the concepts of justice and forgiveness are as sobering as they are inspiring. So King once wrote that while his pursuit of justice would entail a pursuit of authority and power, he said, quote, "I am not interested in power for power's sake, but I am interested in power that is moral, that is right, and that is good." In other writings, he expounded more on these ideas and stated, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when we must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it is right." And so we can see here that when Martin Luther King Jr. is referencing the concepts of justice, at bare minimum, this pursuit of justice is not based in what works. It's not primarily utilitarian. It is not based in politic or popular opinion. It's not dependent on cultural norms, but it is rather based in some sort of outside standard to all of this. It is based in the idea of what is right. And that's a standard that supersedes human opinion, cultural perception, and what works from a utilitarian perspective. This means two things. First, there is a standard that exists. There is some sort of standard that exists. And second, if we lose that standard, justice becomes impossible. If there is not some standard by which we measure actions to see if it is right or wrong, to see if we are pursuing power and authority for the right means, then we lose the ability to determine right and wrong. C.S. Lewis, another famous philosopher, famously said in his book, Mere Christianity, "My argument against God was that the universe was cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he first has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe with when I called it unjust?" And this is a quote that I clung to, particularly for the last 2 years, and I want to explain to you why. Just as King also explicitly appeals to the standards of God as the defining characteristics of what is right, what justice is, Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "If any earthly institution or custom conflicts with God's will, it is your duty to oppose it. You must never allow the transitory, evanescent demands of man-made institutions to take precedence over the eternal demands of Almighty God." Now, for those who wish to dive deeper into the argument that the Judeo-Christian God of the Bible, that I and C.S. Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. relied on, is the God who gives this standard that defines justice, I do highly recommend starting with C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, because he devotes the majority of that work to explaining why he believes the Judeo-Christian God of the Bible is the one who gives this standard. But for our purposes tonight, I want to expand on the conclusions that come from these ideas that are particularly relevant to our discussion. And the first is this: because the straight line exists, this means there is goodness. It is not just darkness. It is not just evil. And even when the evil feels overwhelming, because it does sometimes, goodness does exist. This standard of what is good and right does not come, the straight line as Lewis calls it, does not come from a matter of mere opinion. Now, there are many, many things in life that are matters of mere opinion. But when it comes to questions of what is right, this must be, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, outside of what is popular, outside of what is politic, and outside of what is utilitarian. For example, the idea that something is wrong is what harms the collective good. Well, who's defining good? Who's defining how much harm has to take place before we have harmed the collective good? If we lose an absolute standard of right and wrong, at some level we have nothing left to appeal to but mere human opinion. And that leaves us without a standard by which we can measure justice. But if there is a moral lawgiver who has set a standard by which we can measure right and wrong, this means that goodness, true goodness, still exists. And so does true evil.